Good evening, and welcome back. The storm moves in quickly tonight, and the shadows fall longer than normal, so snuggle in close and drift with me now to Chicago, Illinois, and the summer of 1966. We find ourselves at a modest brick townhouse located at 2319 East 100th Street on the far south side of town, where 9 young women, student nurses at South Chicago Community Hospital, shared not only the residence, but their days, their dreams and their plans for the future. However, before the dawn spills over of July the 14th of that year, 8 of those young ladies would be dead. The house at 2319 was hushed on the night of July 13th. A Wednesday, like so many others in this modest Chicago townhouse. Books laid stacked on small tables, coffee cups cooled half full beside open pages of study. Laughter softened into yawns, and the quiet chatter of young women faded as the summer heat pressed heavy through open windows. The moon cast its silver glow across the south side that evening. Cicadas hummed from the trees outside, a lullaby of an ordinary summer night. But on this particular eve, just beyond those windows, something darker waited. A presence, watching, waiting. And before the night was through, that darkness would step across that threshold and drag the home at 2319 into history as the scene of one of Chicago's most infamous crimes. Around 11 p.m., a man named Richard Speck invited himself, unannounced, into the townhouse at 2319. The door gave way with ease, and the air inside shifted, thickening with something evil and unseen. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he inched himself closer to the reasons he'd arrived. He rapped gently at a bedroom door. Cora Amurao, expecting a housemate, happily opened it. She found no roommate addressing her. Instead, she found a stranger filling the frame. He was tall, dressed in black, a knife in his hand that was not meant to be ignored. The bedroom light caught his blonde hair, the sweat on his skin, and the tattoo, born to raise hell, slashed across his arm, glared at her like a warning. Cora froze, the scream barely escaping her before Speck shoved her backwards into the room, the sudden racket stirring Melita from her sleep and into the panic that had suddenly consumed the space. Speck warned the women to silence and forced them both down the hall toward the larger back bedroom. He switched on the light to reveal 3 more startled nurses now awake, their eyes wide in confusion that instantly shifted to fear and group panic. For a moment, the room held its breath. Who was this man? What did he want? His voice shattered the silence, rough, slurred, commanding. At knife point, he again moved them, the group larger now. He instructed them into yet another bedroom, muttered about money, claiming he was headed to New Orleans. One by one, the girls handed over what they had, clinging to hope that it would be enough. It wouldn't be. It wasn't why he'd come. Moments after Richard Speck forced the terrified women into submission, another sound stirred in the stairwell. The click of heels, the faint sway of laughter that hadn't yet faded from the night. It was Gloria Davy, returning from an evening out with her boyfriend. The summer air clung to her as she staggered up the steps, still warm with drink and the comfort of knowing she would soon be in her bed. She made her way down the quiet hall and pushed open the bedroom door. Instantly, she froze, and for a second couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. a stranger with a knife. The faces of her friends pale with fear, their backs pressed to the wall, all wrapped in each other's arms. As reality focused, a guttural scream ripped from her throat, cut off sharp, as Speck lunged forward, grabbing her by the arm and jerking her into the room with the others. The room thickened with terror, every breath a shallow prayer. Speck, now drunk on power, scanned the faces of his captives. He tore a bedsheet from one of the bunks. With deliberate care, he ripped it into strips, each sound of fabric tearing echoing like a verdict. One by one, he bound the women, wrists pulled tight, ankles lashed, futures fading with knots that sailors would have admired. Their bodies lined the floor in silence, the soft whimper of someone trying not to cry rising and then falling as the ties cut into skin. For reasons only Speck knew, perhaps a whim, perhaps a cruel plan, he left Pamela Wilkening's ankles free, eyes wide, wrists knotted tightly behind her back, not understanding yet why. He stood back and admired his catch, the circle complete, or so he thought. The room was thick with fear, the air cut by Pamela's muffled whimpers as she was dragged from the room, the bedroom door slamming shut. Was she why he was here? Was she the one he wanted? But why? Then, the front door opened. Marianne and Suzanne, returning from a chat session, talked quietly as they made their way to their room, unaware of the events unfolding in the apartment. They opened their bedroom door and froze. In front of them was Speck, hovering over a bound and gagged Pamela, her eyes begging with terror. Horror instantly seized them. They spun to flee, but Richard was already there, blade flashing, his rage filling the hallway. They screamed and raced down the hallway with Richard chasing quickly after them. Instead of heading for the front door, the girls unwittingly raced right into the room where all the other women were tied up and perched on the floor. Their panic was escalated by the sight. Their fight became frantic, but Speck forced them back with the swing of his knife. He drove them into another empty room. Fight as they may, Richard was able to overpower them, stab them, punch them, and get them weakened to the floor. He stabbed them both repeatedly and eventually was able to strangle each of them until they lay separated from their souls. The others listened from behind the bedroom door, terrified but hopeful. The intruder had been driven out by the two women. Then, impossible silence. Long minutes passed. The silence carried heavy on the hot air. The women held their breath, waiting for Marianne or Suzanne to push open the door. Instead, the water hissed through the pipes, then stopped. Heavy footsteps moved in the hallway and returned to the back bedroom. Pamela's muffled cries rose and fell, until they didn't. One swift thrust to her chest ended her cries forever. The terrible silence screamed through the house. Boots moved again down the hall. The faucet opened, then closed. Water on, water off. This time the sound of footsteps did not carry on. They stopped. The door creaked. He'd returned. But why? Wasn't Pamela the target? Had he not gotten what he came for? His eyes scanned the line of terrified women. He grinned to himself. Then, he chose Nina. He cut the binds at her ankles and jerked her to her feet. Cora pressed her cheek against the cold wall beside her and squeezed her eyes tightly closed, every fiber of her being straining not to move, not to breathe, not to scream. She heard Nina's begging, her choking sobs, her horrified screams as she was dragged from the room. And that was the moment it apparently clicked for Cora, and maybe the others as well. Pamela wasn't the target. None of them were. Because, well, all of them were. The girls could hear Nina's fight as Richard stabbed her in the neck, violated her dying body, and suffocated her with a pillow when his act was complete. Their terror grew in that silence because they now understood how this game was going to be played. It was no longer a matter of if. It was a matter of who. Which one of them would be chosen next? Water on, water off. A haunting signal that would repeat itself throughout the night. Murder, wash up, select next victim. Cora, in all her fear and confusion with the events unfolding, had been working diligently to squeeze herself under the low bunk bed. When Nina's sudden silence screamed through the house, Cora understood everything and struggled even harder to get her head under that bunk. The others so caught up in their own terror, they didn't seem to notice she was gone. Her only hope now was that Speck wouldn't notice either. And right on target, Richard Speck appeared in the door. He stared down at the terrified women and again, finally, chose his flavor. He took Valentina, not bothering to untie her feet. He easily lifted her 100 pounds and carried her screaming to her death. Water on, water off. Heart sank. Fear grew higher, tears and prayers flowing like the blood draining from bodies in other places in their home. They all had it figured out by now. He returned for Melita, and the cycle continued. By this time, Cora had managed to completely disappear beneath the bed. She screamed silent prayers in her mind as she was forced to listen to the massacre of the people she loved. Water on, water off. Footsteps in the hall. The creak of the door. Cora held her breath, pressing herself against the wall, praying it would swallow her whole. Richard entered yet again, eyeing his prey. Before he took Pat Matusek, an athletic 155-pound woman, Cora heard him ask if she was the girl in the yellow dress. A question that spoke volumes. He'd stalked them, laid in wait and pounced like an animal. He pushed Pat to the bathroom, punching her in the stomach, rupturing her liver and sending her to the floor with a loud crash. He then slowly, methodically strangled her to death. Water on, water off. Footsteps in the hall. Richard came back to the room. He loomed over Gloria, who had some time earlier passed out from all the drinking she had done that evening. Speck roughly disrobed her as she stirred and violently took what was not his to take. The bed springs squeaked and groaned as Cora caught glimpse from beneath the bunk across the room. She squeezed her eyes tightly closed, held her breath, and made silent deals with God if he'd spare her the same fate befalling her friends. When she opened her eyes again, Gloria was being drugged from the room. Cora slowly closed her eyes and held her breath beneath the bunk, paralyzed in fear, surrounded by the memory of every single scream that seeped into every fiber of her being. The sun had not yet burned away the night when Judy Dykton, a fellow nurse living nearby, rose to study for her neurology exam. She turned off her fan, the July air still heavy with heat, when she thought she heard something outside, a child crying. Pulling back her blinds, Judy froze. Across the street, on the ledge of 2319, crouched a young woman, trembling. Her voice cracked across the silence. Oh my God, they are all dead. It was Cora Amurao, the sole survivor in a house full of death. Judy ran across the street and stepped into the open door. Inside, horror waited. In the living room, Gloria Davy lay nude on the couch, her hands bound tightly, her skin already turned dusky blue. A strip of cloth dug deep into her throat, her head hanging at a sickening angle. Upstairs, the nightmare multiplied. Bodies in pools of blood. 7 young women lay brutally slain. By dawn, the streets swarmed with sirens, neighbors, and reporters. Even hardened detectives vomited at the sight inside. And through it all, a sole survivor sat trembling in the house next door. Richard Speck did not vanish into the night. He wandered Chicago, drinking heavily, leaving behind the wreckage of what he had done at 2319 East 100th Street. For 4 days he drifted, until the weight of his crimes and the sting of failure drove him to a cheap hotel on the city's north side. There, Speck swallowed pills in a suicide attempt, but fate, for once, denied him control. A hotel clerk found him collapsed, gasping for breath, and rushed him to the hospital. His tattoo, "Born to Raise Hell," marked him as unmistakably as the sailor's knots that bound the nurse's wrists. By July 17, 1966, Richard Speck was under arrest. In the courtroom months later, the world's gaze fell not on Speck, but on the sole survivor, Cora Amurao. Fragile but unwavering, she pointed across the room and identified the man who had destroyed the lives of her friends. Her testimony carved silence into the gallery. She recounted the knock, the knife, the circle of women, and the endless sound of running water that punctuated each death. Her words sealed his fate. On April 15, 1967, Richard Speck was found guilty of the murders of the 8 student nurses. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair. For a moment, justice seemed swift, but the sentence was later overturned on constitutional grounds. Speck's punishment was commuted to life in prison, 400 to 1,200 years, a number designed to erase any hope of freedom. And so, Chicago's first modern serial killer spent the rest of his life behind steel bars. Yet prison did not mean silence. Speck's name returned to the headlines in 1996, when a smuggled videotape surfaced after his death. On it, Speck, paunchy and grey, lounged in his cell. He drank, did drugs, even flaunted hormone-induced breasts while boasting, without remorse, about the murders of 1966. "If they knew how much fun I was having," he sneered, "they'd turn me loose." The world recoiled. Richard Speck died the following year, on December 5, 1991. A heart attack ending the life that justice could never quite touch.
Thanks for listening. This has been Fireside Crime Stories, where the darkest tales are always read by Firelight. If you haven't already, subscribe, and before you drift off, toss a little fuel on the fire. Hit that like button, ring that bell, so when the shadows shift again, you'll be the first to know that another fire's burning and another story's being told. Until next time, rest well.